So this is the second video as an argument for God, but when I say an argument, I embrace God. God has left the building. No, he isn't. Right back there. Okay, so there's so much that I'm leaving out, necessarily. The nature of this argument, again, is not one that's pointing to a very particular thing. Again, when I say argument, what I'm sort of saying is a gesture. The gesture of an argument. And so there's much more to explain, so that first video didn't really have anything kind of concrete as for seeing what I mean by this whole thing. So this second video is very, very much needed to understand the gesture. So we have those three brains, but of course we're not done evolution. What comes next? I've argued that there's sort of this integrative modality of thinking that's recently come online. We don't yet have a third brain, but we're, I think, sort of working on it through things like the internet. So the internet is not separate from the process of evolution in a certain sense. It's our artifact that we've created as individuals that is spreading meme ideas, mental ideas across the planet quicker than ever before. For the first time in history now, we have essentially all the information in history available to us. So I noted before that this is essentially the coordination between present, past, and future. So now that we have sort of history as a bundle in and through things like the internet, we can more easily integrate that data, and arguably our fourth mind will be some sort of interface directly with something like the internet. And therefore, it's suggestive that there will be something akin to a direct telepathic capacity that will be very internet-like. And, you know, the next thing with Google we have coming out, really, it's already come out only for the super rich, so where you can use the internet with your eyes and sort of be in both worlds simultaneously to some degree. So it's getting very close to a direct interface between your brain and the internet itself. So something like that, I think, is what we're looking at with the fourth brain, but it's going to give us a lot more data. It's going to give us a super amount of data, and even if it's a virtual movement into the past and the future, that is to say, given the data that we have, we can look in a certain way that's very real. I'm going to shift back now into number 3, because it's very important for this overall argumentation. This argument, in a certain sense, is more on the interior side of things. I, not being a scientist, am not pointing to the more logical way to do this. And I do think that there is an integrative, more scientific modality to this process. However, I'm gesturing towards the meaning side of it, and then it could be taken up more scientifically, in my opinion, which has to some degree already happened. But this is a different view. It's a different take on it than I've ever seen. So this third tier, what I'm calling the third tier, which in spiral dynamics, which I'll post a link on Facebook anyways to, has 6 steps in that first tier. Now, I've noted before that there's a fractal taking place, and those 6 steps they use colors, and the colors are beige, purple, red, blue, orange, and green in that sequence. Therefore, the process of complexity increases in that direction. Purple's more complex than beige, etc. I won't say too much on this, but I'm paralleling those with those symbols. So I have the symbol of the arm, which is a fractal of beige. Now, beige is in this third tier. Beige is here. It's not here, but there's a parallel or connection, I believe, with that more reptilian mind, with the process of building the reptilian mind, in other words. Not necessarily just the reptilian mind, but building that reptilian brainstem, which is the span of the first life forms up into a reptile. So again, that's kind of survivalistic or impulsive or reactive. In that, if we look in history, the beige V meme, that value system, although it's more tool making than any animal prior to that, in that sense, more complex. Birds show some tool making, but I'm saying that there's an order of complexity higher than in early humans, and we're doing things with fire and stone making and so forth. There's, I think, a real level of objective intelligence there, and we might see it in dolphins and some higher mammals that start to have the complex neocortex. But yes, we see a huge warring, I believe, of early human civilizations between like Homo erectus and the Neanderthal. Well, it's more like Neanderthals, arguably, and humans. But there's that intense struggle to survive, arguably, in early human history. And then we move into purple, which I'm saying is a fractal of number 2, which is sort of a circle. I noted before that the tribal people sort of live in dream time. And so I'm arguing that, again, there's a parallel between sort of maybe what might be called nature mysticism. And with purple, there's more a parallel with subtle mysticism, I'd say. And that means dream contemplation, or the dream space. But it's very kind of magical, because people put on a mask and think that they are maybe an animal. And there's correlatives to mammals, I believe, in purple primarily because mammals are emotive, and therefore it's number 2, and so there's the purple fractal connection there. And then with red, there's some interesting things that I've never said on red that have come to me recently. Now, red is a fractal of number 3. It's a fractal of the mind itself. Now, with red, we arguably see the first real calendars come online. So there's a telling of time. Red, or the red fractal, or number 3, humans, neocortex, and so forth. We're able to do complex causal predictions at this point. Now, there's subtle reflections of that in beige and purple, but really red is when it properly comes online in my mind. So it's the most suggestive, it's the most emphasized of what this third tier represents. And there's a lot of issues about power, agency, hierarchy. These sorts of things are very common in the thread of red. Structure, structure for the purposes of power. And if you've listened to my other videos, I do believe that that's our biggest issue that we're butting into at the end of this tier, is the realization of how much control mechanisms have actually been in place across this planet, with the intent oftentimes that aren't very good. So we can look at any of these, and any being within it can be of greater or lesser health, have high levels of pathology or not. And the higher we go, the more pathologies we can have, because there's more complexity involved in the organism. And I would say that our third tier, our mind tier, has had a great level of actual pressure, arguably higher than would be average on the cosmic scale. That is, if you looked at another planet, with, I'd say, repression or oppression of individuals' minds. So there's some pathology here which curves how we see the rest of everything. So it's so hard to get a clear vision of this sort of thing, in my opinion, in part because there's been so much oppression on the mind that says, primarily, actually, I'd say number 2 doesn't exist. Even number 1 is suspect. And so, subjectivity, intersubjectivity, interiority, broadly speaking, is not real. And so everything can be reduced to number 3, frisky dirt. But with the reduction of that, we lose a lot of power in ourselves with that big reduction. There's a lot of stuff missing in our being when we reduce the reality just to number 3. Now, what's really interesting to me is number 4. And what number 4 represents is, so blue in spiral dynamics is what we traditionally think of as sort of the fundamentalist religions, kind of, or absolutistic thinking, or the major world religions come online with blue, approximately 5,000 years ago. So this is often about transcendence, about sacrificing self for the other, where number 3 is a fractal of sacrificing other for self. It has this undertone, although it's not in its healthy form isn't that strong, but of sort of a vampirism. We have to do that a little bit to live. I have to eat plants, and then in some circumstances, arguably, we have to eat even animals to survive. Have to, in especially unideal circumstances. But number 4 says, well, in fact, now that we've got all of this complexity out of the way, we can actually sacrifice ourselves to make reality better, to make other beings more satisfied, and this will have the impact of, living in a state of sort of quote-unquote kind of transcendence. So this is really interesting that, in this, when blue is interpreted through the red lens, through the number 3 lens, then it becomes sort of power-oriented. Red, if there's a God, then the God is spiteful. But blue, that is 3.4, or the blue in spiral dynamics first tier, I argue is still has this undertone of power over, authority over, whereas blue or number 4, indigo, would be far more communicative, far more in communion with. There's more of an agape experience in that, whereas 3-4 is still there's an undertone of sort of vampirism to the God in a certain way, but it's not that strong. And I'm saying that there are indeed absolutely individuals that are very self-sacrificing, very saintly. So, and then orange, we get into, we first see it with people like Plato and Socrates, questioning. Well, why? Give me answer. And there's the smartest, the wisest people just don't know anything. And I think that was very true when that value system really came online around the time of Socrates. And then didn't really bloom, though, for another almost 1,500 years in the Industrial Revolution. So it took a really long time for that to really gain foothold and change into a new value system. And then we see it in the Industrial Revolution when Descartes was told, some would say by an angel, that the next way of looking at the world will be done by tape and measure, by mathematics, essentially. And then you get the Industrial Revolution, the linear processes, but there's again still a fairly strong power orientation, a number 3 orientation within orange. And then we get green, which is the pluralistic revolution, took place in the 1960s. That change happened really quickly, pluralizing reality, relativizing, multiculturalism, equality, you are equal to me, and this sort of sensitizes the spiral so that we can make more of an easy transition into 4, because there's a resonance opening to these new systems, although it has the undertone of, well, all systems are equally good as long as you believe that all systems are equally good. So it's still in the deficiency needs mode until we move into number 4, the integrating mind, which is a being mind. It's an inclusive mind. It allows for all of these stages, all of this movement to take place, and I would say allows for this forward-looking of, there's something greater than myself. So now something greater than ourselves, we get into something maybe like the archetypal mind and what I was calling the God mind. Now there would be parallels here with the archetypal mind with orange and green. So if you've listened to Terence McKenna, one example that comes to mind, whether or not it's right, when he does DMT once, he experiences these elves that can create things out of their mouths. And I think that would be 5.1 or 5.3. Now, I think Terence McKenna is coral, which is the 3rd step of the 4th tier, in my opinion. And so he was looking at a really complex mind that could actually create things in and through their own body. So it's archetypal. It's a creation from the individuation. And then God mind would be a parallel of green in some context, where it's inclusive and all-embracing of everything in a certain way. Radically pluralistic, radically relativizing, so that it goes through everything and includes it. Now, green in this space, again, due to the power orientation, doesn't often look that healthy. But, this mind, hopefully, arguably, would be very healthy, although some might still say not perfect.